There's no such thing as grassroots protests. So when people are like, "Oh, well, it should be grassroots," like, what? You tell me a grassroots movement, and I'll show you how it's not grassroots.
This is Viewpoints, a deeper look into the ideas that shape our politics and culture. Break free from the orthodoxies of mainstream media and hear diverse perspectives from interesting people across the political spectrum. Adam Swart is the founder and CEO of Crowds on Demand, a US-based protest and advocacy firm. For over a decade, he's helped coordinate hundreds of high-profile demonstrations and publicity stunts, from grassroots movements to corporate influence campaigns. Adam has a unique insider view of how protests are funded, staged, and used as political weapons, which is what we'll be talking about today. Adam, welcome to Viewpoints.
Sean, so good to be with you and your listeners.
You've been an outspoken critic of certain forms of orchestrated protest for a while now. Can you give listeners a brief overview of what you're concerned about?
Well, I think that protest is a fundamental American right. It's a right that's enshrined in our First Amendment, but it is also one of the bedrock principles of any free country, the idea of peaceful assembly in opposition or in favor of whatever cause you want, however offensive. To me, that is a core value of mine. However, I think that when people use the word protest and then are violent and then block streets and then cause havoc and cause vandalism, that gives the idea of protest a bad name. And in my opinion, in countries, the free countries where peaceful expression is permitted, it is critical for people like myself who make a living off peaceful expression to condemn violent expression. There is no need to use violence or law breaking in countries where peaceful assembly is allowed.
Okay. And I guess you've seen a lot of this over the last like 5 to 10 years
Yes,
in the US. Yeah.
That's correct. We've seen it in the US. I mean, we've seen it in Europe for a long time. Violent protests, vandalism, burning cars has long been a staple of demonstrations in Europe in particular, and abroad. But in the United States, we've generally avoided that. But I think when there are certain examples in the United States where people have really taken to violence as a form of protest, which I have to denounce. So whether it's the BLM people, in summer 2020, more recently, some of the demonstrations that are going on, it's critical that we condemn the violence because I think, number one, because there's no justification for it, and number two, because I think those with authoritarian tendencies want to put violent protest and peaceful protest together such that they can crack down on peaceful protests too, and
Okay.
not give them any act of doing that. So I think that it's critical for protesters to not use violence, because I think that what then will happen is that authoritarians who don't want any form of protest will try to laud peaceful and violent together as a way to ban peaceful protest. And you saw that under the Biden administration against conservatives. You're seeing it in the Trump administration against people that they don't agree with. And I condemn it, whether it's from the right or from the left.
So your company, Crowds on Demand, offers like protest and advocacy services for clients. And I found that really interesting. I've never really thought about that side of politics before. Can you give listeners a brief overview of what your company does?
Sure. Well, what we do is we create advocacy campaigns from the ground up. So sometimes that includes creating an advocacy group, putting protesters. We're probably best known for assembling protesters. There's misinformation that these protesters are paid actors. They're not. They're people who are passionate about the cause, and we pay them to show up for expressing their views, right? We also do publicity stunts, whether it's a product launch or things like that. But we're probably best known for advocacy campaigns, whether it's trying to push for or against legislation, raise awareness about bad acts by, corporations, or gain attention for a particular cause or movement or company. So
Okay.
we do it. So the objective that a lot of people come to us is the same objective as you might have when you hire a PR firm or a lobbying firm. And we sometimes work in coordination with those type of firms, but in some cases what we do is more effective because it is so outside the box. And in cases where the default is that you're going to lose, it's helpful sometimes to use outside the box approaches.
Okay. Like, let's use an example of a benign paid protest engagement.
Sure. Well, I'll give you like a large scale one that we did that I think most people would probably agree with wherever they are at politically is the delete Facebook movement. So after 2016, there was this huge kind of uproar by both the right and the left against Facebook, right?
Okay.
Because Facebook was essentially using information, personal information, and using it to sell ads to pit people against each other. They did this in the United States, but in fact, even worse, what they did abroad, like they literally caused a genocide in Myanmar, by stoking racial tensions, using their algorithm, right? And, conservatives don't like Facebook because, Silicon Valley, left liberals, right? Liberals don't like Facebook because there's this perception it was used by the Trump campaign or Russia or whatever in order to win the 2016 election, right? So that's the backdrop of this campaign. So we were kind of brought in to raise awareness about how bad kind of Facebook really is. Then we came up with this idea of hashtag delete Facebook, right?
Okay.
And throughout, 17, 18, 19, there were these occasions where, Mark Zuckerberg was doing an event or testifying before Congress or whatever. And we would have these people out there and sometimes in silly costumes and whatever and do protests. And there was media involved and everything like that. But we had protests, outside their headquarters, outside Congress, in a lot of very visible locations. And actually, what that kind of contributed to doing is a lot of really negative press coverage about Facebook. And it, I think, had to do with two things. Number one, they changed their name. They call themselves Meta now, right? They don't call themselves Facebook. The Facebook name became so associated with division and evil that they actually don't even want to be associated with that name. Number two, they've actually instituted policies disfavoring political ads, right? So they've now since are focused more on like commercial ads rather than political ads. Now, I'm not in any way endorsing anything about that company. I still think it's evil, and I still think there's a lot more that needs to be done. But the fact that what we did was created all of this was huge, and
Okay.
I'm very proud of it.
Okay. And can we talk a little bit about the participants who you kind of provide? You basically hook up what sounds like you hook up causes with people who want to
Yeah.
go and do the protest.
Yeah.
And I guess to just incentivize them a little bit with some money. Can you talk a bit about who those people are
Well,
and
yeah.
how you find them?
So let me kind of start with a little bit of an anodyne historical reference. So before 1911, members of the British Parliament were not paid for their services. So who would you guess would become a member of the British Parliament prior to 1911, right? It was the landed gentry, people who essentially were in Parliament for ego and in Parliament to further their landed gentry interests, right? So ordinary people could never get elected to Parliament because even if they got elected, they couldn't essentially sustain themselves because they weren't given a salary, right? So I kind of make that analogy because that's how I feel about protests in some ways, right? If you were not to compensate any protesters, then not all, but a majority of protesters would be retirees, college students, would be people with flex work situations, right? So tech workers, so probably well-to-do tech workers who can work when they please, maybe stay-at-home wives or whatever, trust funders or whatever, people who have the sort of means, and probably people without kids who have more means, right?
Okay.
So that's maybe 20% of the country, right? Is only represented in these protests, right? And for everybody else, they can protest, of course, they legally can do it, but In order to do that, it would require a much larger sacrifice. So you're much less likely to see them out there. So if you
Sure.
want janitors, you want hotel maids, you want housekeepers, whatever, you're very unlikely to see those people because simply they could not, you can't take time off of McDonald's to go protest, right? They're not going to give you time off to do that, right? Starbucks, whatever. So
Okay.
so, all of that to say is that what we do is we compensate people. So now we change the dynamic. So now if we're kind of compensating people a couple $100, whatever, to go out to something, well, then the math changes. Now that person who works hourly can afford to take an unpaid time off day to protest for something they believe in. So
Okay.
we change the math is what we really succeed in doing.
Okay.
And so we actually democratize. I know people are like on the internet are always like, oh my God, that's ridiculous that you say that when you're paying protesters. But actually, like, just think about it. Don't use your emotion, use your head and think about it. Like, that's really
Sure.
what we're doing.
Okay. And I know that there's a kind of tension there between grassroots and like astroturf kinds of things. And I guess for listeners, I'll just say what astroturfing is the use of fake grassroots efforts to primarily focus on influencing public opinion, typically funded by corporations or political entities to kind of change opinion about things.
Yeah.
So like, I guess there's always a tension there between knowing whether or not something is a grassroots real movement and whether or not it's just like some kind of project,
Yeah.
from above kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, grassroots doesn't exist, so it's kind of one of those things like the monster. It's like, okay, there's no such thing as grassroots protests. So when people are like, oh, well, it should be grassroots, like, what? You tell me a grassroots movement, and I'll show you how it's not grassroots, right? I mean, there's a spectrum, of course, but let me give you an example of something that a lot of people would say is grassroots, but I'll explain to you why it's not grassroots. So
Sure.
let's just say you have a few moms, you know, they're upset because the school books are outdated. So they say, okay, well, we're gonna go work together and maybe bring in more moms and we're gonna make sure that the school books aren't so outdated. And we're gonna write to the school board. We're gonna go make signs and go to the school board meetings. And just keep doing that, making calls until that happens, right? Well, you would generally associate that with a grassroots movement because no one's getting paid. But what I'll tell you is, and I don't mean to be sexist because you could have husbands involved in this too,
Sure.
but probably more likely to be moms, just to be real. So the husbands, essentially, whoever is working so that these women can do that activism is essentially funding the protest, right? Because I guarantee you that the housekeeper, the McDonald's worker, the taco stand owner is not out there doing that because they have bills to pay and they don't have the time to engage in those activities. So the probably mostly women who are engaging with that are probably stay-at-home moms, or perhaps they have very flexible work, kind of upper class kind of job that affords them that ability to do that. So essentially what you're witnessing is a funded protest. It's just not funded so directly, right? So even like what you'd think of as the most grassroots imaginable is not really grassroots, it's funded. So how is that better? How is that more democratic than Crowds on Demand saying, hey, we're doing a rally in Minneapolis because Minneapolis has gotten just simply too unsafe, and we are doing a rally of the people who are on the front lines of safety, right? And saying we want a safer city and we want more police on the streets. And we have Walgreens workers and we have McDonald's workers and we have the very people who are subjected to these dangerous crimes on the street of Minneapolis, and we say we're going to put them all together and we're going to compensate them to attend, right? Is that really less democratic than the rich soccer moms going and making the signs, right? And I think that all of it is great, but is that less democratic is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess if I see if you have a lot of money and you can really, pack the crowds out there or create these campaigns.
What does that do if you don't have a good cause? If you have a lot of money and you can pack a crowd and you can spend a ton of money, what does that do if the cause doesn't resonate?
Yeah.
And what does that? I'll answer the question for you. What that does is ultimately it's going to fizzle, right? And I'll give you an example. I mean, you're up north in Canada, but maybe your listeners have heard of a gentleman named Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush, brother of George W. Bush, ran for president. He was generally considered to be the front runner in the 2016 presidential election, right? He, I think, raised about $200 to $300 million. That's hundreds of millions of dollars, right, for his campaign. So what his money did was it got him ads. He was everywhere. Everybody knew who Jeb Bush was, and the name recognition obviously didn't hurt. Although, I mean, that name isn't always well regarded. But okay, so we had this name recognition. Ultimately, Trump comes in, right, with name recognition and fairness, but who I think he spent like maybe 1/100th of what Jeb spent in the campaign and trounces Jeb. Why? Not because Jeb didn't have the money to compete. It's because ultimately Jeb's message didn't resonate. So the money is important. Don't get me wrong. The money and the crowd size, because obviously I'm not trying to discount what I do, but what I'm saying is the crowd size is the catalyst, but the movement ultimately has to take shape. So yes, if you have a great product launch and two people are there, it's not going to get picked up in the media, perhaps, right? So having the people there is important, but ultimately, if you have 10,000 people there, but the product isn't good, it's ultimately going to fizzle. So I think that, yes, money buys attention, but it doesn't buy a guarantee of success.
No. Well, maybe we can get then to the dark side of this business, which is something you've been speaking out about, just to kind of turn it around and look at how it can go wrong. Because obviously, I think you've been speaking out about things like Iranian influence,
Yes,
like foreign governments and shady proxies, and
yes,
and I think it's also to the 717 protest, which I think is like an anti-Trump campaign.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's talk a bit about some of those, and see, like, because I get your defense of it, but also too you can see that even you yourself can see that there are there's a dark
really
side to it.
And you need to be aware of the fact that hostile countries, so to your first point, hostile countries, Iran, the countries that you would think would not like America, they don't like America, right? And their goals are actually not so much to hurt America, but more to create spectacle that they can use in their country, right? So when the people of China or Russia or Venezuela or Iran or whatever country you want to think of, those people, look at America and they say, oh, well, we want the freedom America has. We want the prosperity America has. They want to be able to show tape initially it was state TV, but now they actually do it on social media of riots in the street, tear gassing, and say, look at it. You don't want to be like America. It's so chaotic. The Chinese do this like a lot within China, where a lot of Chinese people I've talked to think America is basically like the Wild West. People there are like gunfights everywhere. Like, they literally think it's like very, very dangerous. And that's a narrative that the Chinese government has effectively propagated, right?
Okay.
Because it suits them, because when people say, oh, well, we want freedom, then they can say, oh, well, no, you don't really want to be like America, do you? Like, look at how bad America is. So I think that you have to be aware that these countries are trying to use every mechanism from social media to protest to essentially propagate that. And obviously Iran and those other countries were probably behind a lot of the protests on the campuses to some degree. My guess is that they were probably funding the more violent parts of it, right? Because I think there's a huge incentive for them to do that, because if they fund a violent protest and Molotov cocktails, it creates a great visual that they would really want to do. Because of course, Iran doesn't really care about the Palestinians. The Palestinians are sort of a prop for them.
Okay. It's funny though, like the the objectives of foreign governments often line up quite well with quite a lot of the media elite and
Yeah.
educated elite who have a kind of anti-American sentiment baked into their politics.
Yeah, I've always found that really curious that the educated elite don't have more love for America. And I think they should, because America has obviously been good to them. I think there is, yeah, they tap into those, to that sort of skepticism of America. I think that's true.
Hmm. So foreign interference can happen. So here's a case where money is bad for politics because it's not the money that you want to be dumped into
I don't
politics.
think foreign money, like in that respect. A foreign company, sure, but not like foreign country money.
Yeah, yeah. So they're doing it for domestic reasons, but it also creates a lot of local problems and a lot of
Yeah.
division locally as well, right? Like between like
Well, yeah. Well,
Muslims
there's
and
actually
Jews and
something that came out in the Times, the New York Times, of all places, recently about how China is essentially even interfering in local politics in New York, right? Where they're trying to use small dollar contributions and other strategies on the local level to essentially kneecap. Metaphorically, politicians who they think are unfavorable to China, right?
Mhm.
So, it's curious because you think, okay, maybe you don't like someone who is pro Taiwan on a national level, but who cares if there's a city council member? But they're really, the Chinese are thinking the long term approach where someone's city council today and then their senator tomorrow, right? So they're actually trying to kneecap people who are anti-China even at the local level so that they never rise to that next level.
Yeah. That's
Politics.
some long-term thinking going on there.
Very, very intelligent. And it's the type of thing that the CIA used to do a lot, and we've kind of, the CIA doesn't do it anymore. We probably should. I mean, there are probably is doing it. We probably should be doing that stuff abroad too, of doing all that. We used to do it in the Cold War. The U.S. did all this stuff. We were, and we got a lot of press for the coups that were engineered, right? Like Chile or whatever. And that's misinformation mostly. I think there's a lot of information to suggest that coup would have happened even without the United States. But there's not a lot of as much information about how the United States did a lot of just sort of information campaign abroad to try to kind of build up politicians who were kind of more favorable, pro-Western, pro-capitalist, pro-US, right?
Sure.
And that's
Sure.
natural. But again, I oppose it when a foreign country is doing that on our soil.
Yeah, we've had that actually in Canada too. They've been meddling with
Well, Chinese have been meddling in Canada for a long time. And well, you have Chinese interference, you also have Indian interference, right? Because you have a lot of the influence because the Sikhs are a big voting bloc in Canada, but then they tend to be more anti, and correct me if I'm wrong, they tend to be more anti the sort of the Modi government. So then the Indian government is trying to sort of influence. So the Sikhs tend to be more on the liberal NDP side of things. So then the Indian government wants to then kind of swing things for the conservatives because they think that's going to be more favorable to them. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I obviously think that you guys should have zero tolerance for any foreign interference in your politics, and it should be, again, what works for Canada.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you ever turned down a protest campaign for ethical reasons?
Sure. I mean, we've turned it down for ethical reasons for sure. So one of the things that I would consider like an ethical, because we've turned down campaigns for all kinds of reasons, like so the foreign stuff, obviously, hate groups, obviously, something where we're putting our people at risk, for example. So this could be, we're not asked to do a violent protest, obviously, but even if like we're having peaceful protesters next to a violent protest, right, then that could put our people at risk because the authorities might have trouble distinguishing between the peaceful and the violent. So,
Yeah.
so that's a consideration. So you're asking about ethical. So ethical is kind of a whole different category. And I think that's an important one. And one of the main reasons that I would turn down it on ethical lines is it's a bully campaign. I don't like to bully people. I like to kind of hold powerful people to account.
Okay.
Powerful companies, powerful politicians, powerful people. So if it's a case of like, I don't know, like for example, like protesting at a drag event, right? Where okay, like I let's just say I have sympathy with the position that we don't want kids exposed to the drag shows. So let's just say, okay, maybe the concept of that, fine. Well, but now you're protesting outside a drag brunch. That to me feels bullying, where you're picking on somebody who is not powerful, like some drag performer in some small town, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I feel like that feels like more like bullying. If you want to stop the drag performance, like sure, go to the city council meeting, go to the school board meeting, protest the school board, protest the state board of education, right? Like do that, but don't go after some drag performer. Do you see
Okay.
what I'm saying? Where like
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
that feels like bullying that person. So that's like maybe like a hypothetical example of something that I would feel that, hey, even if I agree with your overarching objectives, I really, really don't like bullying.
Okay. I know there's in Toronto here, there's a Jewish neighborhood close by, and they were like busing Gaza protesters into that neighborhood
Uh-huh.
to like just harass locals, basically.
And that's like that's unethical, right? So if you want to protest at the Israeli consulate, right, Israeli embassy, that okay, that's fine. But now you're just going to like a random, I don't know, Jewish delicatessen and screaming at them for Gaza, like that feels like bullying to me. You know,
Hmm.
because that even if the delicatessen owner is the biggest Netanyahu cheerleader, he doesn't have any power, right? Like, why are you going after this? It feels like bullying. I like to go after the powerful, right? So again, even if the like you want to do that, go after the concept, go after the really wealthy donors who are donating to whatever the cause that you don't like are, but don't go harass ordinary people. And by the way, I would say the same thing to the is if the Israeli folks were going into some Arab neighborhood and doing the same thing to them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so you mentioned before how against sort of violent protests you are. Have you
Yeah.
had any experiences where protests that you think are just going to be nonviolent end up sort of like tipping over into or get hijacked or anything like that?
Well, I've been in this business for 13 years, so I have a pretty good sense of when things are gonna get tense and when things are not going to. And just because things are gonna get tense doesn't mean we won't take it on. So I don't want to people think I'm a total coward, but like we'll take on things that get tense, but we try to have precautions such as security and other we alert police and other things so that we are aware of that. Some of the things that do get violent that let's just say you wouldn't think would get violent. I have not generally experienced that. We generally have generally aware. I mean, to be clear, our people have never ever committed any act of violence in a 13-year period. They're specifically instructed. They're peaceful. They're respectful. They're told not even to swear at somebody and to be respectful. You know what I mean? Be a rock when someone's yelling at you. That always looks better. There are cases that you wouldn't expect to get violent that have gotten violent. This was one that I was not involved in, but the LA City Council was rightly considering legislation to ban child sex offenders from camping near schools. So, okay, that seems pretty reasonable, right? That if you are a convicted child sex offender, you shouldn't be able to camp near a school. Okay, like let's just say probably 99.9% of people agree with that. Well, the other 0.1% stormed the city council chambers and shut down city council
Hmm.
to defend the child sex offenders' right to camp near schools. Like what? That's what I would say I did not expect. I would not have expected something like that. So there are
Yeah.
times where it can be unanticipated. Um, And there's an element on both the far left and the far right that I don't even think are passionate about the issues at all. They just are looking for excuses for violence, and chaos. And it's important to be aware of those groups.
For sure. I know people like who are even just kind of perpetually angry at the whatever, and they're going to kind of go from protest to protest. It doesn't really almost matter.
That's right. That's correct. And they're agitators. Some of the people are just professional looters. They like to loot, and they'll attach themselves to BLM. They'll attach themselves to right wing, Proud Boys, whatever, whatever makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What did you think about that mostly peaceful protesters gaffe? The news coverage of Portland.
That was so you're referring to summer of 2020, and
Yeah.
this was a CNN reporter who, against the backdrop of a burning city, said that the protesters were mostly peaceful. Well, I mean, technically, the reporter was not wrong in the sense of a majority of the people participating at the protest did not themselves commit an act of violence. So actually, technically, he's correct. So let me be devil's advocate for a second, while generally probably agreeing with your sentiment. I think every protester, whether it's January 6th, BLM, whatever, needs to be judged on their own conduct and in an ideologically neutral way. So the sense of, hey, if you were there at an event where a Molotov cocktail was thrown, if you did not throw the Molotov cocktail, you are not responsible for someone else doing that, right? If you're holding a BLM sign or you're holding a Trump is the legitimate president sign, right? January 6th or whatever they were holding, right? The fact that someone else did something violent is not on you, right? We live in a country of individual rights, right? Not collective punishment. So I'll kind of put that as a preface for the general kind of sense, which is that people need to be judged on their own volition. If you trespass, it doesn't matter if it's for BLM, neo-Nazi, Trump, MAGA, whatever. You're trespassing. If you're violent, doesn't matter what the cause is, you're violent, right? So, of course, that was an absurd statement. Everything I said, with everything I said to preface it, that was an absurd statement that he said, but it goes to the fact that our biased media, like there's very, very little unbiased media now. Our biased media does not want to cover with any degree of rationality. They want to say what their viewers want to hear, right?
Sure.
And their viewers want to hear, oh, this is a righteous protest about, a police, killing of an unarmed person. So they want everything they hear to confirm their beliefs. Just like conservative media wants to present a certain way, right?
Sure.
Conservative media presents Chicago as a hellhole, right? And I will say I was in Chicago last week, and albeit I was not in the bad neighborhoods of Chicago. So I'm not trying to say all of Chicago is great, but I'm saying the idea that Chicago as a whole is a hellhole, it was like contradicted by my 3-hour walk through the city. I walked 3 hours and saw like 2 homeless people and was not threatened once, right? So again, not saying there isn't violence, not saying that the mayor isn't a total fool, right? Of course, all of those things can be true, but it is exaggerated. Why? Because that's what the conservative media audience wants to hear, right? So yeah, of course, people are going to be told what they want to hear. I think it sucks that there isn't this sort of objective journalist that has trust of people on both sides of like, hey, when this journalist says it, I'm going to pay attention to it.
I find protests really, I'm not a joiner, so I don't like to go to protests, or I don't even really feel comfortable if I go to a sporting event, like cheering along with everyone. I find it kind of that mob mentality kind of just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
But one of the criticisms of like participating in those types of things is like, you may, say you saw the George Floyd video and it really upset you that this person got abused by the police. And then you want to go out and, show your support. So you go out to a BLM thing.
Yeah.
But like BLM has like some pretty radical ideologies associated with them, anti-American, anti-capitalist,
Yeah.
all kinds of, they just run the gamut of craziness in the background. So you're kind of marching at a BLM
Canadian chapter
protest.
was even wackier, actually. The BLM Canada people were like even nuttier. I was about them. So yeah, even in Canada, it's like it's crazy. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, so if you go out, you want to do this nice thing by going out and supporting, protesting violence against minorities, but then you end up kind of being part of a movement which has a lot of negative aspects to it. So
Correct, and you lend your body to a sort of a show that movement has support, when in fact what you're saying is, hey, so I mean, BLM was kind of a fraud, unfortunately perpetrated, and it's very unfortunate because I met with BLM when it was starting. I remember they asked me, some of the key people asked me for advice. This was, I want to say, 2015.
okay,
Before BLM became widely known, because people think it started after the George Floyd. It actually started around the time of the Trayvon Martin, like 2015
okay,
time, and I said, you guys need to focus on economic inclusion and wealth creation, right? And establish Black America as the ultimate independent voting bloc that will vote for its economic interests and will not, and doesn't owe anything to Democrats, doesn't owe anything to Republicans, and will fight for Black people regardless of the party, right? And
yeah,
you can, because the fact that they always vote, that all the Black leaders always support the Democrats, actually makes the Black vote very weak, because they know they don't have to do anything for Black America, right? So it's all just sort of lip service.
sure.
So if both parties had to compete for Black America, it actually would make them so much more powerful. And if the focus was on wealth creation and ownership, then the community would become much more powerful, so less susceptible to being able to be mistreated by the police or whatever the case may be.
But they didn't take your advice on that?
Well, I think the facts clearly indicate they didn't. And unfortunately, it went in this kind of very dark direction, and not only like ideologically, but then it also sort of became a grift where they were more or less like just it was kind of what, it's a modern day indulgence, right? Like the Catholic Church used to do, where you'd kind of pay to go to heaven, like Amazon and Apple and all these companies. I forget exactly. I don't want to like list all of them because I could be getting some of them wrong, but all these billionaires and big companies donated to BLM as basically, it was like protection money. Basically, like, if you don't want a mob at your offices calling you racist, right? You better pay up. Right. And then those people use the money to buy themselves houses and, mansions and whatnot. Right. So it was just kind of a
Okay.
fraud perpetrated and also misused by, like the Real Housewives of wherever, like what turned out to the BLM. And like, do you think they know anything about like, institutional racism? No, they were just flexing on Instagram. So BLM is one of the biggest failures to the Black community ever. And it like did such a disservice to the Black community. Like if I were in the Black community, I would be demanding answers from these people, because you had an opportunity to really have lasting change, and all you did was made a few people rich.
Mm-hmm. Is there like, I feel like a lot of it comes down to media kind of not doing their job, which is not actually investigating and reporting on these things, and also having a preset narrative. Like I think a lot of people come from Ivy League backgrounds and become journalists or whatever. They have like a lot of these sort of critical theory ideas in their head, and they think that everything's all secret racism everywhere,
Correct.
and they see it
Correct.
everywhere. And so in that case, when they see like whether it meets up with the statistical facts or not about violence against Blacks, it becomes part of the narrative, and they don't need to report on the truth
anything
about
that
it.
predicts that. Well,
Exactly.
it goes back to what I said about the media's bias, and they don't have to, and they don't want to report facts that don't kind of align with what they're saying. So the fact that like what I think a third of big city police chiefs are black, right? The fact that that black people are represented proportionally in terms of black people are about 13% of the population in America, and I believe they're represented at those levels within the police departments, right? The fact that black people are represented at the higher levels of the police departments, the fact that police violence against black people has gone down, right? So again, it's not to say that that there wasn't police brutality in the case of George Floyd. It's not to say that there isn't disproportionate brutality against African Americans. All of those things can be true, but the fact that they refuse to contextualize it and to basically act again like the streets are a killing field for black people is misleading and wrong. And of course, in poll after poll, the defund movement, which we have done campaigns against, was opposed by a vast majority of black people, right? The majority of black people do not like police brutality. They do believe correctly that they are being singled out for police SOPs, for example, but overall, they would like more police presence. They just want responsible police presence, which isn't
Yeah.
that what we all want.
Yeah. I mean, when you remove police from an area, the people who suffer most are the poor and the people
Yeah,
who don't have means. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it again, BLM was really just had such a negative effect on the black community, unfortunately, and their protests were really a part of that.
Working in the field that you're in, have your political views changed at all over the years as you've been doing this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say yes. I mean, I grew up as a Democrat, right? I'm from California, and I'm definitely not a conservative by any stretch now, but I definitely would call myself an independent. And both parties have to earn my vote. And I'm on the side of common sense. So there are areas where I think that the Democrats are on the side of common sense still. So I don't think people should, I mean, this isn't a case in Canada, but in our country, there are people who literally die because they don't have access to healthcare, right?
Hmm.
That is a moral sin. And Democrats are on the side of common sense and saying that is wrong. And Republicans don't seem to care. So I'm on the Democrat side on that. Republicans are on the side of common sense when they say, we shouldn't have a crazy ideology in our schools that tells people America is like a bad place. We shouldn't defund the police, right? We should have law enforcement and all of that. So where there is common sense, those are the areas that I like to work in. So
Hmm.
I don't associate myself with either political party, and I don't plan to unless one party becomes the party of common sense, which neither party has done yet.
Yeah. And like from the sounds of it, you don't feel conflicted about like the work you're doing. Like you kind of back what the campaigns you are, and you feel like this is a valid part of the political process.
Well, I'll put it this way. So I love doing stuff I agree with. And sometimes there are things where maybe I don't disagree, but it's not a cause that I am actively like engaged in, but I'm like, hey, let's hear it out. The way I look at it is like, if you buy an ad on the news, right? The news channel doesn't have to agree with you, but it has to be like not totally offended by what you're saying.
For
So that
sure. For
the
sure.
way I would do it. So I don't have to completely agree with you, but I have to see, hey, this merits being discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. So big picture, like, do political protests actually do anything? What's the purpose of them nowadays? Like in modern society, we have social media, we have all these communications technologies. Do we really need to go and like move our bodies to a particular location to make something happen?
I would argue that because of that, it's almost more important because essentially online is easy to ignore because you're so used to it. But having people show up outside your offices, you can't ignore. You're outside your government, outside your offices, and have people out there. No, it has a few purposes. Number one, it forces the issue into consciousness. If you see the people there, you can't ignore it. You can ignore online. Number two, it gets media attention because media needs to have something to cover. And number three, it actually persuades people that you see to have to listen.
Mm-hmm. How would you see curbing some of the bad protests, like, blocking traffic or creating bullying situations, or how do you manage that in like a, you obviously want to preserve the right to protest.
Is the answer. We don't
What's
do
that?
We wouldn't do any of it. So Crowds on Demand doesn't curb traffic or block roads. Now, we might block a road if there's a permit. So if we have a permit to block a road, just like anyone else, like if you had a permit, then you have a permit. Well, we would get the permit first.
Yeah.
But the one misnomer, just a little advice, because I know we're near the end of the time, to your listeners, they want you to think you need a permit for a protest. You, for the most part, don't. Unless you're going to block a street or have like a big sound system, you don't need a permit. They want you to think you need a permit. You do not. Express your First Amendment rights. Like, you don't need the government's permission to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I so enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thanks again for coming on and shedding a light on this issue. I didn't really know too much about the sort of paid protest side of things. It's really fascinating.
It's important, and I think it's awesome. And my advice to my friends in Canada is to keep demanding true free speech, because the Commonwealth law of Britain and the Commonwealth countries does not afford enough free speech protections, and demand real free speech. I don't care if you're liberal or conservative. It's at some point it's going to bite you, the fact that they can put you in prison or sue you to death for like some sort of innocuous statement. Like, don't let it happen, and don't let whoever is in power convince you that that it's just to limit hateful statements. Like, the definition of a hateful statement is so subjective. So demand real speech from Carney and demand it from the conservatives if they ever can get their act together.
Sounds good. I totally agree with that sentiment.
Thanks, Sean. Have a good one.
Thanks, Adam. Take care. That's it for this episode of Viewpoints. Thanks for listening. If you like viewpoint diversity and you want to hear more like this, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit viewpointspodcast.ca. And if you have ideas for topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect using the contact form on the website, or you can send me an email directly at sean@viewpointspodcast.ca.